Goodness, I totally forgot. Ah, we're live, and I forgot to tweet a picture. Oh, thanks, Pam. I messed up. We're running a little bit late. So yeah, we're live though. This is JavaScript Air, your JavaScript broadcast podcast, all about JavaScript and the web platform. And unfortunately, there's no tweet picture this time. I'm sorry, but there
we
is.
just do a normal tweet and.
Yeah, we'll do another tweet later. But yeah, this is a show and it's great. So this is a show I'm really excited about. It's called Publishing JavaScript Packages. And yeah, I feel like we have some really good guests with different perspectives and experience doing this. And so I think it's going to be a great show. Before we get into it, though, I'd like to start out by thanking our sponsors and giving them a special shout out. So Egghead.io is the show's premier sponsor, and they have a huge library of bite-sized web development training videos. Check them out for content on JavaScript, Angular, React, Node, and more. And Egghead.io is also has or hosts the free Redux courses from Dan Abramoff. Find them at egghead.io/Redux. There are 2 of them, and they're fantastic. And then Front End Masters is a recorded, expert-led workshop with courses on advanced JavaScript, asynchronous, and functional JS, as well as lots of other great courses on front-end topics. And if you want to learn about open source, come to my workshop next month. Or if you want to learn about Webpack, I also have a workshop next month, so check that out. Track.js reports bugs in your JavaScript before customers notice them, and with their telemetry timeline, you'll have the context to actually fix them. Check them out and start tracking JavaScript errors today at trackjs.com. And WebStorm is a powerful JavaScript IDE. It makes developers more productive with its super intelligent code assistance for JavaScript, Node.js, Angular, and React, and integration with lots of different tools. Learn more at jetbrains.com/webstorm. And finally, Trading Technologies is looking for passionate and innovative full-stack JavaScript developers who want to work on cutting-edge solutions in a collaborative and challenging environment. Go help them build the top choice platform for derivative traders. All right, great. So because this is a live show, we can chat with you, our viewers. So if you go to Twitter and with the hashtag JSAirQuestion, you ask a question, then we'll answer those at the end. It'll be awesome. And because this is a weekly show, we are going to have another broadcast next week at the same time, and it's getting started with web audio. So I think that'll be an interesting show. I have very limited experience with web audio, and so yeah, I'll learn something. Hopefully you will too. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and introduce who we have on the show today. So first, for our panel, we have Pam Selly.
Hey.
And I'm your host, Kent C. Dodds. And for our guests, we have Henry Zhu.
Hey, everybody.
And Stephen Boneman.
Well, hi, everyone.
And I mispronounced that. That's Stefan. And did I say your last name right?
That would be Boneman.
Boneman. Okay, awesome. James Kyle is going to join us shortly, hopefully. There was a little bit of a scheduling mix-up. I wish I could say that's the first time that's ever happened. So, yeah. Hopefully he joins us later. And then John David Dalton.
Hello, and Dagny. Hi.
Bring your dog to work day, or are you working from home, or?
Oh, I'm just bringing her in today. So.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah. So our topic today is about publishing JavaScript packages, but I think it would be useful for us all to get to know each other a little bit. So Henry, why don't we start out with you? Could you just give us an intro to who you are and like things that you like?
So I'm Henry. I work at Behance. I like open source. So I maintain Babel and work on other various projects. And I don't know, I've been playing Pokemon Go.
Nice. Awesome. And Stefan?
So here's the unmute. So hi, yeah, my name is Stefan. I'm working at the Swiss company Living Dogs. I am running the service Greenkeeper.io, and I think why I'm, yeah, thank you for the cheers. And the reason why I'm on this show is because I've written a tool called Semantic Release, which helps with publishing modules. And one apology up front, I messed up the timing, so I'm in an airport lounge, and I hope it's not too loud or anything. I'll hope this works out.
Well, it's sounding good so far. John.
Hi, so I'm John David Dalton. I am the lead dev on Lodash. Lodash is super modular, and so I've had to come up with ways to deal with lots of opinions on modules and module formats and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Sweet. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into it a little bit. So publishing a package on NPM should just be as easy as npm publish, right? So why do we need to have like special tooling around publishing a package on npm? Maybe it is that easy, and we can just say, okay, goodbye, everybody.
So for me, it's when you start dealing with hundreds of modules where it becomes a problem. And then you need something like Lerna, or I built my own script to deal with this because Lodash is a monolithic library that's then broken into modules. And so I have 400 now modules to deal with. So trying to manage them individually, 400 is super time consuming. Even with scripts, it's still time consuming. So that there's really no way to do it without that, or else it would have to be like my full-time job, and that's not the case. So I have a script where I check to see if only comments have changed, then I don't do a version bump. I just change the code in line. If dependencies change, then I do. I think that is a patch, a minor bump. And then if code changes but no dependencies change, then it's a patch release. And I have a script that automates that and will also call out specific dependencies that don't change very often, like the is array and is number. I don't expect those to change a lot, so I have special logic in there for lists of that to help me manage that. I know there's other ways to do that, but for me, I'm actually trying to move away from that and to just go to the single package that is modular. So then that would be the single source instead of having 400 different packages. Cool.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think I want to dive a little bit more into the way that you like manage Lodash and deploying those or publishing those packages. But Stefan, do you want to talk about like semantic release and how you solve this problem?
Yeah, sure. So first, I want to describe the problem why npm publish isn't enough. So as John already said, one part of the problem is we're living in a small modules world. There are just so many, and there are a lot of repetitive steps. And it's not just about like doing npm publish once a week or once a day. It's about doing it over and over again for multiple packages. Some of us have like more than 100, so it's getting really tedious to get all these steps done in the correct way over and over again. But the second part for me is like that a release is not just uploading new code or like tagging this commit and then that's a release. That's for me that is not a complete release because we should have communication in there. What has changed? Ideally have a change log, upload that to the same location where the users can find it. So it's more than just making the code available, and that's why there are more steps involved. And oftentimes people just leave them off because they are annoying to do. And by automating them or having a defined system, easier to have something, even if it's not perfect. There is something, and people know where to look. So it makes it way easier to publish, but also to consume packages.
Yeah, I know that like earlier on, when I just had a handful of like maybe one or two packages that I would work on regularly, even that, like there are 10 steps at least every single time you want to push some new change. And that's like fraught with human error, and I made mistakes all the time, broke tons of people, and had to like deprecate versions, and it just takes a lot of a lot of work. And so, yeah, even with just a couple of packages, it's really useful to kind of automate that process a little bit. So do you want to talk about the semantic release and how that automates the process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So semantic release is building on commit message conventions, which means you annotate semantically annotate the source code, or rather the changes you do to the source code by the time you do that. And so this is taken from the Angular project. I think it's like grown into many more projects now, and it's like pretty common commit message style that I can link up. And so I really liked how Angular managed their change logs, and I saw that like how they are tagging their commits is almost directly mapping to semantic versioning, or the types of different versions. So if you have a commit message that includes a new feature, then that hints towards a new feature version, or if you have a fix and nothing else, then that's a fix version, or if you have a commit message that documents the breaking change, then you can you can just simply reuse that information, but it also goes the other way. If you make the publishing dependent on this information, it forces you to write this information down, because otherwise you can no longer publish packages. And that was like my idea of, on the one side, making it easier, making the publishing process way less tedious, but also making it force you or everyone to use these best practices to document what you've done, to write breaking change annotations and stuff like that. So then whenever you get this code onto the master branch, for example, the CI will run and look at all the commits that happened since the last time you published, and if there is, for example, a new fix, it will just publish that automatically, use that information, generate a change log, and you don't even decide there's a publish happening. It's just happening on its own.
Yeah, and I can say for me, like, I was really skeptical with semantic release. Actually, I should link to the conversation I had with Stefan about semantic release when I was trying to decide whether I should use it. I was really skeptical, but once I started using it, just like, oh, this is so nice. Like, even packages that I don't really maintain much or use myself or anything, I can still continue to maintain them and publish them because it's all happening automatically for me. So yeah, it's really magical. I recommend people check it out. So yeah, actually, why don't we have Henry? Why don't you explain how you've kind of solved this problem so that unique is.
Yeah. Okay. So the project that we use is called Lerna. And it actually was just like what John said. It's just a bunch of scripts that Sebastian made for Babel. Because every time we had to do a release, you had to do all these manual steps. And then later, when we had more maintainers and I joined to help out, it was confusing because I didn't know what to do. So what he did was just automate a lot of those steps. And eventually, we realized, this could be generalized so that other projects could use it too. So I know James, who's not on the show right now, but he did a lot of work to rewrite a lot of the logic because it was literally just one file. And now, like, somehow it became its own project. And we didn't really even market it at all, and other people are using it too because a lot of people want to use a monorepo. And so in Babel 5, Babel was just a single package, and I guess a lot of you know that in Babel 6, everything was modularized. And so what it means is that Babel Git repo is a set of NPM packages, and they all have in their own folders. And so Lerna, what it does is just help you to automate all the Git commands and NPM commands that you would normally do. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like that solution kind of caters to a different type of problem, right? When you have a lot of packages that need to be published together. It sounds like Lodash might be able to benefit from this kind of approach. Have you thought about it, doing that, John?
Yeah, I've looked at it. and it's something that I could do. It's so similar to what I'm already doing. So Lodash is a mono repo in one of its branches. So if you go to the Lodash repo and you go to the npm packages branch, you'll see all the npm packages for the modularized builds. And so I have my own script that does it, and it's not great. It's super hacky. My whole build step is super hacky. I'm hoping to get rid of it in version 5. It's based on regexes because that's great. Yeah, it's something I've cobbled together over the last 4 years, and I'm ready to get rid of it. So yeah, when I saw Lerna come out and I saw that it's maturing and getting better documentation and more features, like I'm seriously looking at that for going on in the future. If I continue to use the mono repo, I'm still on the fence about that, just because it's a lot easier for me to just punt and say use the one package because it's got all the modules in it already. So, but yeah, no, that's great. Lerna is fantastic.
So what about like? I think it could be useful to talk a little bit about like how you know what version to bump when you're publishing a package. So whether you're using any project or no project at all to do your publishing, we should probably mention there's also Synthresaurus has a package called NP. I think that's short for Node Publish or npm Publish. But it also kind of automates this as well.
It also guards against the npm publish issues. So if you publish a lot of packages, you'll know that npm has had some problems with the Node versions and corrupting your published packages. I believe they've got patches and released fixes now, but for a time, if you were on Node 6, you'd likely publish a package without a README or without an index.js, which is not great. And so I'd have to do a lot of things like make sure I MVM to Node 4 before doing a publish. I'm so superstitious that I never straight publish from a package. I always npm pack first, inspect the package, and then publish from within the package, just to make sure that I'm not accidentally including things that I shouldn't be, and doing it that way. So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, actually, on that note, I accidentally published like a 9 megabyte GIF in one of my packages, so like that totally can happen.
I accidentally published my uncompressed so I npm pack, and I accidentally published a version of Lodash that had the package folder inside of it, so it was doubling the package size because it was the package within the package. No one caught it though. Like, I can't believe it. It was that way for like 2 weeks, but it's fixed now. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, once we automate things with our tools, we kind of tend to forget it and not think about it. You know, I've seen some cases where people will be using a bundler and find that, oh, I've got 2 versions of jQuery in here, something like. So yeah, there's a danger to automating stuff for sure. So I wanted to talk about Semver though. Could we chat about like why does Semver matter? What do Stefan, did you have something else you wanted to actually touch on?
Yeah,
before
just to complete that, because John mentioned these problems with npm 6, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think they are fixed, and by the like when they were still there, npm added that one as well. So when you publish from npm 6, I'm not sure if it just errored out or had a warning, but npm added that as well.
Yeah, that's been fixed. If you publish with 6.3, then you should be good. Hooray!
Yeah, that was awesome.
Pam, did you have something else?
Yeah, so I just had a quick question because it's hard to keep track of all these different packages you all are talking about. So you were about to talk about Semver, which I'm guessing is semantic versioning. Is this the same thing as semantic release, which is a repository under the semantic release organization?
Yeah, good question.
So yes, no.
Thanks for bringing us back to like making sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So yeah, so I wanted to talk about Semver, which does stand for or is short for semantic versioning, and so it's a specification.
So it's a Yeah, so it's like a spec, not necessarily like a tool.
Exactly. Yeah, and then semantic release utilizes that spec as well as your commit messages and that kind of thing to automate your releases. And that's the thing Stefan was talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, who does anybody want to talk about Semver and how those three numbers in our versioning work?
I can, sure. So a lot of people. I'll just get into it. Here's how I think Semver is. For me, breaking changes are a major version bump. New features are a minor version bump, and bug fixes are a patch version bump. And I stick to that. I try to. There's always room for interpretation there on like what's a bug fix versus what's a breaking change, and I use like best judgment for that. I try to keep major version bumps to once a year for Lodash itself, just because there's a lot of like packages that depend on it, and then upgrading, and then all of that stuff. So I try to keep that as minimal as possible. But yeah, that's how I see it. Is if you're going to introduce a breaking change, save it for a major bump. Any kind of new feature, just minor, and then bug fixes are patch.
Yeah, and so just to bring it back even further, in your version for your NPM modules, the version consists of 3 numbers separated by dots. So that first number is the major, the middle number is minor, and then the last number, or the number furthest on the right side, is the patch. Yeah, and that way, and actually NPM takes this into consideration when resolving your like the versions that you've listed in your package.json. And so you can say, I want to take this version and any minor versions higher than this. That you can use the caret. Or I want to use this version and any patch versions higher than this, and that's the tilde. And then you can go like crazy and just put a star in there, and that's like probably a bad idea. But don't do that.
Don't do the star. No.
Yeah. So James just joined us. Hi, James. You look like you're outside.
Yeah, here at the Facebook campus.
Beauty. So actually, let's go ahead and give James an opportunity to introduce himself. There was a little bit of a timing issue, so apologize for that, James. Do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I am working at Facebook, and I do a lot of open source stuff. I'm one of the sort of core contributors to Babel as well as Lerna now. I've been watching a little bit, so I can sort of tune right back into this conversation, hopefully. So.
Cool. Thanks for joining. So we were just talking about Semver. Did anybody else want to touch on Semver at all, or like any other comments about semantic versioning?
I have comments. Sure. So semantic versioning, if you're in the NPM ecosystem, is the way to handle your releases. It's so handy to be able to just use the caret, and then your users can forget about it. Like if you have a bug fix or new features, they don't have to worry usually about that breaking their stuff, which is super nice. You can get into issues where there's unintended bugs that are introduced and things like that, but generally it's fantastic. I mean, I've even leveraged the caret and tilde in the individual modularized packages for Lodash. So I have internal packages, like they begin with like an underscore prefix, and some of my the external packages depend on them, but I don't want internal packages to be held to the same standard as external. So I would like to introduce breaking changes to internal methods more often than external. And so I can say internal packages use the tilde in my builds process for versioning these, and external ones use the caret. And so that allows me to have a little bit more freedom in changing my internal methods. So yeah, if you're ever in a competition with another library and you want a selling feature, say, hey, I follow semantic versioning. All right, that helped me so much. Like whenever I was going against the other guys. I turned out, you know, if they end up breaking on minor patches and you don't, then you're gonna just get all those users. So it's a good thing to follow. It helps. Yeah. Cool.
Stefan, did you have something else in addition?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to add is like that semantic versioning is one spec or one way to do this, and I think it's the dominant one in the Node world, and npm like says it's using Semver for its version numbers. But there was or is a lot of conflict here because, especially with the major version numbers that are used for breaking changes, a lot of people associate that with big change, which they reserve for exciting new stuff or marketing or whatever. So like Web 2.0 or HTTP 2, it's like it's a new major version, so it's a thing we've been building from the ground up, and it's like something to be excited about and to write blog posts about. And so there's a little bit of a conflict because people either expect something exciting from major versions when it's just a breaking change, or people want to reserve their major versions for something they can celebrate or market or something. So that's a little bit of a conflict there, even though I'm strongly on the side of Semver and using that for communication of breaking changes.
Cool. I would agree with that too. I think that some libraries can build up their major version bump, and you just need to get used to saying like, hey, a 2.0 is going to come, a 3.0, a 4, a 5, a 6, and to not put so much pressure on the major version bump. I've seen libraries like come and go, waiting for their 2.0 release. So it's just something to to schedule, put it on your roadmap, say, hey, these changes are going to come. Let's do a major version bump, and then just keep it going. If you put too much pressure for that major version bump, then yeah, you can drag it out. But with Semver, you just got to get used to doing like lots of major releases over time.
One of the things that worked really well in the early days of Babel, it was the sort of instant versioning that we did. When we had changes, we published them immediately rather than waiting to. And this meant high response times for bug fixes, new features. We weren't afraid to make breaking changes early on, which led us to having like a lot of flexibility and sort of setting expectations to our users. And then as it stabilized over time, we were able to sort of slow down on that and once we were where we wanted to be, it was a lot more stable rather than sort of holding on to changes forever, like you mentioned.
Cool. Yeah. So actually, I kind of am curious a little bit about Babel because Babel is kind of a unique situation because like the stage 2 preset, for example, when a feature gets or maybe a better example would be like the stage 0 preset. So like some of the stage 0 features are parser specific, like they need special logic in the parser to be able to parse these new features. And then if something gets dropped from the spec, then you have to drop it from the stage 0 preset and maybe even the parser. So how do you manage that kind of a breaking change where it's not entirely in your control and you're just kind of like whatever the spec is what this stage represents?
Yeah, so Semver is a really good guideline on sort of individual projects, but the trouble with them is that they do not communicate everything that there is to communicate. It doesn't say sort of ecosystem-like things like this is only going to work with this version of Node, and can't communicate stuff like it's this version of JavaScript or things like that. So we have this like problem space of almost needing to invent our own package manager in order to support all these things at the same time, and it's messy for something as complicated as Babel, but for the majority of projects it works quite well. But yeah, there are certainly some shortcomings of Semver, and that is one of the big ones.
Interesting. Cool. So If I wanted, like, if I was just getting into this and I wanted to start learning, or like maybe I've got a library out there, I'm just running npm publish myself. Where would you all recommend that I go to look at automating some of this process, or should I even put in the effort to automate that? Like, why would I want to automate it, and how would I go about doing
I feel like what you should do is just write down the actual commands that you've been running, and then over time you'll realize like, oh, I have to do a build step every time, or I have to add the change log every time, and over time you'll end up with the list of commands that you run every time, and then you can just write your own script for it. I mean, maybe eventually you could look at a project like Lerna, which just generalizes everything, but I think there's no reason to go out of your way if it's already working for you.
Anyone else have perspective?
I'm guilty of not doing enough automation. I still manually, like, I use my text editor for it. Every time I do a version bump on most of my packages, I Control F for the package, for the version number, and replace, and stuff like that. So I've seen that cause some problems when maintainers take a leave of absence and you have secondary contributors trying to do a release. There's lots of things that aren't there. So it makes me think that if I ever want to take a break, I've got to start to automate this stuff to make it easier for people to publish. So, yeah, totally.
I mentioned that before, but that's exactly what happened with Babel. In order for me or anyone else to make a release, we have to learn all this stuff, and so Sebastian ended up making the script, so all I had to do is just run one command to publish everything.
So I think like interesting if it's not the first time you're publishing, but if you're repeatedly publishing and you're like having lots of repeated steps, but also you're not fully aware of what steps you should be taking or maybe shouldn't taking, it's a good idea to look into what's actually happening when you publish a package. And John previously mentioned npm pack. That's something I'd recommend. So when you publish an npm package, locally it packs up a tarball, and then that's uploaded to the npm registry. So it's interesting to understand what is ending up in this tarball, why is it ending up there, and like what steps should I take? Because, for example, what is a common thing that people don't do is like running npm prune, which is a command that just removes all the dependencies that are in your node modules folder, but not in your package.json. And that's something that can lead to very ugly bugs, because like locally, when you run your build and stuff like that, it's all working. And so if you kind of have an understanding of what is happening under the hood, so what is ending up in this tarball, and how is my module then going to be rebuilt on the consumer's machine, then you understand the steps that you have to take, and then it becomes pretty apparent that you want to automate them, because there are so many and so many mistakes and subtle things that you don't immediately notice, but only notice when it's too late. So yeah.
Actually, on the note of npm prune, and like just in general optimizing the package that you have, what are some of the optimizations that I could make? Like, if I just say, okay, just publish everything, I don't even think about it, I could be publishing like a 9 megabyte GIF or something, that really doesn't matter, or my tests, or a bunch of stuff that doesn't necessarily need to go in the registry. And what that results in is when people install my package, they have to download all of that stuff, and it makes it even take even longer. So what are some of the tips and tricks that you'd give people? Like, what are some actual things that they can do to reduce their package size?
So usually, like just by default, npm pack will pick up files just like Git would do. So if you have them in the files in the git ignore, they don't end up in the tarball in the end. And then on top of that, there's the npm ignore file, where if that's present, you can like override your own npm ignore things you don't want to have in the package. But the thing that's a bit counterintuitive here is that like usually the things you want to have in source control are the opposite of what you want to be published. So if you transpile, the source code should be in the repository, and the build artifacts should be in the package. So the default isn't really working out very well. So what I am using now is in the package JSON. There you can add a files array, and then you can simply whitelist the things you want to have in your package. And I think that's a very good exercise to explicitly add things. You shouldn't be thinking about what to remove, but what is like, it's perfect once you cannot remove anything anymore. So that's how you should address that.
Yeah, and it's like a pro tip on that. By default, it will always include the README and the license and the package JSON. So normally for me, that files array is just dist, and that like it just does the dist directory. It works out great. Is there anything else that you all have ideas of how to optimize your package?
So I use the files array if it's a small package, but for things like the Lodash package, which is a collection of hundreds of modules, I don't do that. I use the npm ignore for that, and then I examine the package with npm pack just to make sure. Just because like 500 entries in there would be kind of gross. I don't know. Does I haven't tried it in a while. Does the files doesn't array doesn't allow you to use like a grep or sorry, a glob syntax, right?
I think it does. I'm pretty sure it does. That'd be something to test out.
Yeah.
And it's also allowing you to use entire folders, so you don't have to like it's called files, but it's files and folders. So.
Ah, okay. Maybe I'll try that then, because I do have just specific folders of stuff. So cool.
Yeah, something to think about. Another thing is, and actually, the NYC project. It's like instrumentation for code coverage, and actually with their release of 7.0, they're like the de facto now. Istanbul and NYC have like merged now, which is pretty cool. Yeah, newsflash. So NYC, they were having trouble because like they have a bunch of dependencies, and so they were having trouble with when people would download their package, it'd take forever installing all those other dependencies. And so another thing that you can do is use the bundle dependencies or bundled dependencies. It's like they're the exact same thing. And what that will do is like normally when you publish your package, it'll ignore everything in the node modules, and then when somebody installs it, it'll install your dependencies. But if you list a particular module in your bundled dependencies, then that will actually get published as well. So you run npm pack, and your package will actually have a node modules directory with all the modules needed for that bundled dependency. So what's cool about that is when somebody goes to install, npm will say, oh, this package is in the bundled dependencies. I don't need to resolve that, that version. I'll just take the node modules directory that's already part of this package in the registry. And so there are some trade-offs with that, because now somebody couldn't like upgrade a version of that transitive dependency, but like for a package like leftpad, for example, if everybody had been using bundled dependency for leftpad, then nobody would have had a problem, because leftpad would have been actually included in the package itself. It doesn't need to actually resolve to the registry. So that's another thing to look at and think about the trade-offs. I actually have a video on YouTube where I explain how this works, and so I'll post a link to that in the show notes. Any other thoughts or ideas about optimizing your package that you publish? Okay, sweet. So another question that I have is, when would somebody start thinking about using one of the methods that you all have? Let's start with Lerna. Like, when would I start to think maybe I should start using Lerna?
Okay. I thought Henry was going to go there. So Lerna is not necessarily meant for people who are publishing a single package at a time. It's meant for these sort of monolithic projects like Lodash or Babel or Meteor or Ember or Angular, all these different things, and you end up wanting to put things in separate packages, but Lerna takes this idea of a monorepo so that you can centralize your version control while having those sort of like independent like micro modules that NPM loves so much. And in this way, Lerna can automate the process for you, but it's also meant to be extensible and scriptable. So people have built things that like semantic release for Lerna, and I know John does a lot of stuff in terms of the way he versions things in terms of introspecting the actual code that has been written. And Lerna is meant to be this sort of scriptable sort of platform, so that it's not just like this is exactly how you do something and it's sort of rigid in that way, but it allows you to specify a lot of different things and sort of use its internal tools to like build other things. And we're just looking to do more and more of that. So, yeah.
Cool. And what about semantic release? At what point would I start to think, okay, maybe I should start using semantic release for this? Is it something where like my project has to get big enough, or I have to release it enough, or like when does semantic release make sense?
So I think it's the opposite, because Lerna is something that pretty huge projects use that are modularized internally, and semantic release is something that like once you are familiar with it and agree with its ideas, is something that you can use for something really, really small, because it's not about one big project that's broken down into multiple modules. It's about having multiple modules like that you write in your everyday life or whatever, and then having a way to publish them. Like they don't have to be connected. It's about having one safe way of publishing all your modules without much overhead, without having to be logged into the right NPM account or whatever. It's just this one way where it can publish packages, and you can set it up with a simple CLI. So it's one command in the beginning, and then it's set up for you, and you don't have to touch it anymore. So you can use it for something as small as like one function, or as soon as you decide to have it in an NPM package.
And I'll just mention that I actually do have it on modules that are like one function. Semantic release has been awesome for that. And actually, I was going to put this in my tips, but I have a generator for my open source modules, and it totally includes semantic release. And so like instantly all of my modules have semantic release added to it, and I don't have to think about releasing things anymore. I just think about making changes to code, and then everything else happens automatically for me. Thank you for semantic release.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it. So I want to add something to it, because when you have all these modules, you probably have written them once, but you're also not in active development for them all of the time. So this is also pretty handy, because you can just go into a pull request, and once you merge it, the new version is out. You don't have to do anything with that. But GitHub introduced a lot of new features for pull requests. So in the pull request interface, you can now squash and merge. So you can rewrite the commit message in there. You can protect your master branch, so you like have control over when these releases happen. And so if, as I said, these small modules that you've written once, and then maybe there comes a pull request in, and as soon as you like it, you do just merge the pull request, and then the new version is out, and you don't have to touch it or anything. So it's set and forget for like all these small modules.
Cool. John, we didn't give you a chance to touch on this with like basically from my perspective, it sounds like your solution is much more like specific to your needs. Would you say that that's a good solution for for other people, or would you recommend that they try to use one of these like prepackaged solutions?
So mine was just unique because it came up over time as I started adding more and more modules. Like I said earlier, I'm actually trying to get rid of my way of doing it because it's a lot of overhead and it's starting to defeat the purpose. I'm also starting to lean towards less mono repo and more bundle package. So one package that has a lot of modules in it. Because I'm a utility library, like that's what I'm into, right? Whereas Babel has lots of plugins and things like that, Lodash is a collection of utilities, and so I'm leaning more towards just having one package and modules because it integrates into things like the Babel plugin for cherry picking individual methods, which is Babel plugin Lodash, and it integrates into Lodash Webpack plugin, which dynamically rewires the module paths for smaller builds. So I'm finding I actually get more benefit from one package, and it's also easier to manage because it's just one package versus 400 of them. That's where I'm actually leaning, is to just do the one. It's tricky right now though, because like NPM uses the individual packages for it, so I'm going to have to work through like showing people that it's actually more beneficial to use the single package than it is to use the individual ones. You get smaller builds out of it too, which is great, and it's maintained more frequently. I do releases to the individual or to the primary Lodash package more frequently than I have to do for the 400 other ones. So.
And I think it's also way easier to deduplicate the one Lodash module rather than having all the individual ones. Especially if there are two ways and you have dependencies that use the individual ones and you use the global Lodash package, then it's hard to deduplicate. And if everyone would just use the one Lodash, you could deduplicate it and then pick the individual modules from there. So I agree with that.
Yeah, the individual modules are nice though, because in situations where you want to mix like a Lodash 4.0 method with a Lodash 3.0 or with an underscore code base, you can just pull in that one. But just overall, it's so much easier just to work with the one package, because they could always include that one package and then cherry pick in the one module. Now, it wouldn't work with the two Lodash versions together, right? But that's the one case where it wouldn't work. But everywhere else, it's pretty flexible. So yeah, I'm starting to lean that way.
Yeah, I actually ran into this exact thing previously, and having individual packages does actually make it easier to incrementally migrate major versions of Lodash. At my previous job, we were stuck on, I believe it was Lodash 2 or 3, because of, I think, the extend function had changed very slightly, and it broke something when we tried to upgrade. And if we were to have those individual things, we could have been able to track down exactly which things broke and which things didn't, and we would have found that much sooner, I think, and not been blocked by it, because we had to go down through 8 levels of dependencies to upgrade some random one that was using Lodash 2 or 3, and it was just a mess. And meanwhile, the only other option was either including 2 versions of Lodash or just pinning a really old version of Lodash, which both options suck. So, yeah.
I'm noticing that the devs are interesting when it comes, or users are interesting when it comes to modules and packages. If you have a package and it has too many dependencies, devs will say, it's gross, it's too modular, I don't like it. But being modular at that level gives you a lot of benefits because there's less code duplication. So it's this weird hang-up where if you have a single package but it's got pushing 3 dependencies, 4 dependencies, if any more than 2 dependencies, and devs start to turn away from the package. What I've had to do is inline a lot of the dependencies for the individual modularized packages, which is gross, but it actually increased adoption. because devs were like, oh, it's just this one package with very little dependencies. But in reality, I'm inlining a ton of the dependencies for it. And I really don't want to do that anymore either. So I think that with the transition from 4 to 5, there'll be less breaking changes, and it's more about being just modular first instead of monolithic first. So I think from that standpoint, there should be less of the need to use the individual package to supplement breaking changes for an older version, or to bypass breaking.
Yeah, and I want to add another thing, which is download speed, because if you always have to install the huge Lodash package, it would be intuitive to think that that makes things slower, but that way it's way easier for NPM to cache it. So you're always having this one Lodash thing in your cache folder, and it's just copied over. You're not downloading anything. And the thing that's really costing you the time is all the round trips for all these individual Lodash submodules. So actually, this is going to speed up installs and not making them slower.
I sort of have to disagree, because I think a lot of this tends to get a bit exaggerated in how much it actually impacts people, because one, NPM's cache really doesn't ever even get touched. It just sort of ignores it unless you pass an explicit flag and like only look it up from the sort of offline version. And packages like Lodash that would sort of be broken down to this level tends to it's small enough that I've never seen an actual issue with it, and you're saving like milliseconds at best. So that sort of trade-off, I would never really even consider it.
It's touching the cache though. Like, it's still talking to the registry, but you'll never download the tarball for the same version twice. So, like, because there could be one reason to like split it up, because I don't want to download this huge tarball, but this is only going to happen once for the individual versions of Lodash.
Yeah, but that doesn't behave any differently if you have one package or 30. It's all, once it's there, it's there. And
yeah,
so
but
the difference doesn't end up impacting anyone.
Yeah, but the likelihood is higher that you already have installed Lodash once before, and you save all these round trips because it's just Lodash, not Lodash unique, Lodash for each, whatever. But yeah.
I actually like having my npm install take a long time, because that gives me more time to play like foosball or get on Twitter or like just kidding. So we're coming down on our time here a little bit. I wanted to talk about one other thing, and we have one question on Twitter, and that thing is npm scripts. And so what are some of the pro tips that you can give about whether you use npm scripts at all, or what kind of tools that you use to script these things? You don't use scripts. Just kidding.
I like npm scripts. I mean, like, I don't know what to really say about them. They're super handy. They treat your dependencies like they're installed globally, which is nice for executing things like using Babel to build things, or using Mocha or whatever. There's some advanced things too, where it can take variables into the command line as well, and I've only used that like once or twice, but that's super handy. I've started to use build scripts a lot, or sorry, just scripts in general a lot in Lodash and its related packages. Super handy. So I would say jump into it, use them.
Specifically, I was kind of thinking there's a npm script that historically has been a little controversial, and that's the pre-publish script. So there's a really long issue on npm that's entitled something like pre-publish inexplicably runs on install. And when I saw that issue the first time, my thought or the way I interpreted it was that, like, when other people install your package, it runs your pre-published script, which, like, generally you'd have that run the build and whatever. Turns out that's not actually what happens, and so I I have a video where I explain exactly how the pre-published script works, because I told a ton of people never to use pre-published scripts because of that reason. Turns out it's a fantastic script to use, and so yeah, you can definitely use it. It's pretty helpful. Before you run or before you publish something, you want to make sure you run the test and you run linting and you run the build, and using these npm scripts with these hooks can be really useful. You have a build script, and then you also have a pre-build script that will delete the original dist directory or something like that. So I would recommend to people to check out npm scripts and how they can be leveraged for publishing packages. So any last thoughts before we get into our Twitter questions? Okay, sweet. So we have Kyle Jackson, Robstock, who asks, would it be best to start with Lerna if a collection will become quite large, or to just start with semantic release when starting small?
Yeah, so I think that Lerna is great if you do plan on having that sort of gradual growth. If you're not, then I would say it's probably just overhead for you. Lerna goes a little bit further than just publishing. It can help with stuff like bootstrapping your repository, so that you have so when you're developing a ton of different modules and that have interdependencies, you have this issue of having different versions inside of each node modules folder, and so Lerna also solves the issue of development and this whole workflow by sort of linking together the packages to pretend that you're working on one's normal version altogether, and this sort of helps build before you're even starting to publish stuff. So yeah, going back to the original question, if you plan on wanting to publish a bunch of different modules, or even just a handful of them, it can be useful, but I wouldn't introduce it just for the sake of introducing it. That's never a good thing to do with any tool.
Good point. Pro tip.
I think that Lerna is something that get developed for very big projects, and I think if you grow really, really big, you have very specific problems, and I think Lerna isn't something I would use if I don't feel those problems and if I don't have something that I really want to solve. It's not something I just use because I want to use it, which is a bit different than with semantic release.
I almost feel like that's in similar vein to something like GraphQL and Relay. Those are catered a lot better to really, really big problems. Although it's fun tech, so whatever. Cool. So let's go ahead and we'll get into our tips and picks section. So I'll go ahead and we'll have Pam go first, then I'll go, and then we'll give our guests a chance. And I think this might be a little bit of a surprise for James, so we'll let James go last. So yeah, Pam, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So my tip for the week is not so much a tip, but I kind of fell into an internet hole trying to figure out what the NYC in Istanbul/NYC stands for. As far as I can tell, I think a bunch of you all are smiling, but so that won't come across in audio. But if you find out, let me know. I'm interested to know. So my pick for the week, though, is something that I think is really cool. LambCI is a serverless continuous integration tool. So it's pretty neat. So if you need a build server, but you don't want to run a build server, you can use LambCI to run your continuous integration on AWS Lambda. So it's really neat. It's all JavaScript, so it's awesome. Definitely check it out.
Very cool. So for me, I have one tip, and that is automate things. So I have a link to a blog post that I wrote where the premise is, saving time isn't the only reason for automation. And in the case of publishing packages and stuff, I've definitely saved a ton of time. by automating things, but yeah, there's a lot more reasons for automating things, so I recommend you automate stuff. And then for my picks, I pick ngrok. If you haven't heard of ngrok, it's secure tunnels to localhost. It is fantastic, a really great tool. I recommend that you use it. You probably have use cases for it. And then I am also going to pick my Egghead.io course, How to Write a JavaScript Library. I think I've picked it before, but I think that it's really helpful if you're whether you're just getting into writing open source or if you've been doing it for a long time. There are things in there that hopefully you can learn from. So great. And I do talk about actually publishing. Like in the course, I publish a package, and it's, yeah, so good stuff. All right, John, why don't we have you go next?
All right, cool. So my first tip is reduce barriers for contributions. So that means that if you have code style checking and things like that and linting, maybe make it an optional fail, just so you're not bombarding a new contributor with tons of nitpicks, right? It's easy to merge and clean up after than it is to sit there and berate them with, like, semicolon here, space here, yada, yada, yada. So I find it's easier to get happy contributors by being a little loose on the guidelines to allow them. Like I publish the same contributing text as everyone else that says, hey, use this style checker, and I have all the builds, the scripts in there to do it. But if they don't, I'm a little lenient on that and allow them to go ahead and merge the commit. The second tip is, let me see if I can pull that up, is volunteer if you see a project that is lagging behind and not releasing as regularly as you'd like, or maybe they've gone, the repo has gone cold. Usually just pinging the author and saying, hey, I'd like to pick it up and help out. You'll be surprised. I mean, I've done that to a couple of projects and brought them back from being neglected. So I would say go for that. And you don't have to, by doing that, you don't have to take on the role alone. You can then start to prime other contributors to become core as well. So I'm repo sitting is.js at the moment. And so while the maintainer is away, I'm there closing issues, merging pull requests, getting it ready to do a version bump, but I'm also finding new contributors that would like to become core so I can then step out, and then the project is then continued to be maintained and updated. The pick for today is ESLint plugin import. So this is a ESLint plugin that will help lint your ES6 modules, and they are just now adding unambiguous grammar support. Yay! So unambiguous grammar is part of the Node proposal for handling ES module imports. It basically states that your ES module must have at least an import or export declaration, and so this linting rule will help validate that. It's my baby step into getting it included into ESLint, the parent linting project, but we'll start off with a plugin first, and so that's the one. It's called, again, ESLint plugin import. So check that out.
I love that plugin. It has saved my bacon a lot. It's awesome. Cool. Stefan, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. So for the tips, as Kent, you mentioned life hacks, and automating publishing is about saving time. I have one life tip: if you're able to, always bring your skateboard to the airport, because that's a huge time saver. And for the picks, I wanted to pick npm pack and npm prune. We talked about them before, so I'm just repeating it. These are very handy commands. Then another thing I'm picking is the npm changes feed. So the npm registry is, or traditionally was, a CouchDB instance. And it, yeah, sorry, just got interrupted. So it was just a CouchDB or a Couch app, and the changes feed is still available, which is schemdb.npmjs.com, and using standard CouchDB tools, you can just get information about packages in real time, and you can build really cool things with it. And the third thing is shrink wrap. I just wanted to give you the tip, like I've experimented with that in the past, that if you publish a package and you have a shrink wrap file present, the publish, or rather the install, is going to respect the shrink wrap. So I'm experimenting with like only generating, not having the shrink wrap file in the repository, but generating it on publish, so that when users install a package you are really want to have certain versions of, you can just use the shrink wrap to have the exact same dependency tree as at the time when you were publishing. I think that's it. Yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to think about that for a little bit. Cool. Henry. Oh, sorry, John, did you have a comment?
I was going to say, if you shrink wrap, I think it means it bypasses the cache too. There's other packages available that does something similar to shrink wrap but bypasses that. I'll have to dig it up and we'll put it in the links below. But cool.
Sweet. Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, go ahead.
So my tip is that if you ever have like a question about like the code of a project or something like that, it could be that someone just needs to make a PR for it. And the context of this was Dan Abramov. He posted on Twitter why the Babel output for imports had 2 variable declarations in it. And later we looked into it, and it's like, yeah, it didn't have to be. So it was just that no one really thought of like inlining to the thing. So a lot of times, if you have a suggestion, you should bring it up and maybe either ask someone else to do it or make a PR for it. And I made the PR, so hopefully that goes in soon. And then my picks, there's a project called The Bad, which is the opposite of Babel. So if anyone is looking forward to using ES6 and they want to use Babel, but they want to like hand translate their ES5 code to ES6, they can use this project called The Bad, which is literally just Babel backwards. And the project used to be called 5 to 6. And then my last pick, so I made a Chrome extension a while ago that what it lets you do is when you go to a PR or an issue and you want to know how many issues or PRs a collaborator has made before you can know that. So if someone's coming to your project for the first time, it'll tell you at the top of their name, it'll say like, oh, this is their first PR to this project. So then you'll know like, oh, I can like help them out, or their experience and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that extension. It's awesome. And I also love the Bab. It's a fantastic project. It's really impressive. Cool. Now, James.
Yeah, my tip is go home, stop working, take a vacation. Don't work on the weekends. JavaScript is cool, but the other side of your pillow is cooler. So, yeah, I wasn't always there, and more people should be there. Yeah. What's the other term that we use? Picks. My pick for the week is flowtype.org. If you go to Flow is a static type checker for JavaScript. It's great at incrementally migrating your system to having types. And if you've ever had the problem of undefined is not a function, then this is for you. And you can use it with a couple different IDEs and make the experience much nicer. It's sort of what I've been working on during what Facebook calls boot camp. Yeah, check it out. It's great.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. This has been a great show. Let me just wrap up with a couple closing announcements. So, yeah, just like to give a shout out to our sponsors. React.js program is Master the React.js ecosystem with Tyler McGinnis. And Sentry is cross-platform crash reporting. So check them out. Thank you, Silver sponsors. If you have suggestions for the show, for guests or topics or both, go to jsair.io/suggest. If you have feedback for this show or any of the other shows or the show in general, then go to jsair.io/feedback. And if you want to jump on our weekly newsletter that gives highlights about the show and other interesting things, then go to jsair.io/email. And then, as always, we are a weekly show, so check us out next week on getting started with web audio. Should be stellar. And with that, I think we'll just say goodbye. So thank you so much for our guests coming. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all later.
Bye.